Hi, I'm Janice Switlo, and I'm just going to add a few comments to my discussion on Rupert's Land and the history in that part of the world. And I'm referencing this book, The Path of Destiny, again, Thomas H. Randall, and it's 1957. And it's, history. And this is from the subject of from British conquest to home rule. And it's talking about, various histories. Anyhow, meanwhile, there was a strange new stir of life in the Canadian prairie country, where all this time the only human inhabitants had been roving bands of Indians, fur traders, and their half-breed offspring. In 1813, the Norwesters were at the crest of their power. In what Canada's Governor-General knew vaguely as the, quote, Indian Territories, end of quote, the whole sprawl of the continent from Lake Superior to the Pacific, and from Minnesota to the Arctic outfall of Mackenzie's River. No rule or law existed but that of the Northwest Company. In the region about Lake Winnipeg, they tolerated some outposts of the Hudsons Bay Company, but the trade was mainly in their hands, and their rule went with the trade. Although the Norwesters flew the British flag and gave a loyal toast to His Majesty at all their feasts, in operation theirs was an independent Canadian empire. For 30 years they had been thrusting into the Arctic and the Pacific, mapping the country as they went and regarding it as their own. Now, of course, the attitude at the time is that Indigenous nationals, Indigenous nations, were not quote-unquote modern peoples, and I've mentioned that in a previous episode. The whole concept, still Doctrine of Discovery, by French planting large crosses and others planting flags, that somehow this assertion, mere bare assertion of sovereignty, for instance, served. Well, it wasn't just monarchs doing that. It was also, as you can see, companies of men. Now, this particular company was not authorized by the Crown to engage in trade, but who was going to stop them? There was no, as it said, no rule of law or law existed. There was nothing to prevent them from overtaking the monopoly that the Hudsons Bay Company had been officially granted by the Crown. So, what's very important about this is while, the Northwest Company, its Norwesters, were out there, mapping and claiming and saying, this is our trade routes, and this is, our turf. We're controlling this business in this area. It had nothing to do with underlying title, of course. And it's only about who was, quote-unquote, controlling the area. But what's critical to understand is what Canada's Governor-General knew and understood. Because Canada's Governor-General is the Crown's personal representative. So the Crown, in this time, having granted, a monopoly for business conduct of business to Hudsons Bay Company, knew this as the Indian Territories, which is another way of saying this is Indian country. And this was at a time where there were no treaties yet in place. So it's very telling to see the recognition. And it's important to understand that the actions of companies of men, whether they're authorized by the Crown or not, again, had nothing to do with establishing or taking title in any shape or form. It was simply their conduct of business, and however they decided to engage in it, there was no one from England, for instance, that was going to stop them or make them conduct their trade in any other way. So the fact that there was no British law in effect here at this time, there was no permissions granted by Indigenous nations to the Crown to exercise partial political sovereignty. This is what this is saying. There was nothing. That does not mean that nothingness for purposes of British and people coming from Europe had anything to do with the continuing existence or destruction of the continuing Indigenous nations and their long-standing Indigenous law. Again, I remind, it's trite to say The law of the land is exactly that. It's the law of the entity that owns the land that prevails. The Crown did not own that land, therefore could not make grants of property or proprietary rights to anyone, including to a company of men, such as the Hudsons Bay Company, because she herself had no interests in the land. That land remained totally, as it does today, remains in the ownership of the Indigenous nations. And that's all I have to say.